Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. It's Monday. If you are here and watching a little bit early, great. Let me know in the comments. Say hi. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I am going to get started in a few minutes, but if you are here early along with me, if you can just put in the comment down there, wherever that is, that you're here. We'd love to hear from you and where you're from. That would be great. So we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Thank you all for being here. If you are here, it's great to have you. Thank you for being. So, funny little story if you didn't know. Hey, Dario, all the way from Italy. Welcome. A funny little story. If you get my newsletter, then you may have noticed that I made some mistakes in it. And that is what happens when you rush to get something done. And so I made that mistake. I also made a mistake when I was posting on LinkedIn. I didn't include the link to the Summary Sunday, so I apologize for those two mistakes. But again, that's a reminder to all of us. Haste makes waste. I was in a hurry to get that stuff done before I had an appointment, and all kinds of crazy stuff went wrong. So, I mean, the links were still in the newsletter. You could find it, but it was not pretty. So I apologize for that. And we'll get started in about a minute. We'll be talking about this week's Summary Sunday, which had some cool articles in it. Questions to ask if you are interviewing for a remote job, um, good questions to ask during an informational meeting, all kinds of good stuff. So we'll get started in a minute. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Hannah Morgan, and I am the Career Sherpa, and I am talking this week about the Summary Sunday that I published yesterday. And I was just confessing, if you get my newsletter, you may have noticed that some of the links weren't labeled correctly and that it was a little sloppy. So my apologies for that. I was in a hurry to get that done and I did not do a good job proofreading. So lesson to all of us, right? Make sure you proof your work. Come back and proof it again. So this week's Summary Sunday was called Job Search is Different Today. I'm going to put a link in the comment box so that you can follow along if you haven't read it already. If you are here and you're watching, don't just lurk, put in the chat, tell me that you're here because there are a lot of familiar faces that I look forward to seeing on this. So let me know if you're here today and where you're from. That would be great. What I usually do is just run through the articles and sort of share more conversation and it's a chance for you to ask your questions. But I like talking about why I shared these articles besides the fact that they were popular and they performed well on social media. That's generally my criteria for selecting them. Almost always. I go through my social media feed and see which ones got the most engagement, and I figure, well, if they did well on social, they'd be great topics that great to reiterate and collect in the Summary Sunday. So that's how I come up with these. Um, hey, Aline, good to see you. Um, so the first article that I shared, which I really liked, is because more and more of us will be, if we haven't already, be interviewing for remote jobs. And so the Muse is one of the places I love getting their articles because there's always some gems in there. If you don't subscribe to the Muse, I highly recommend that you do. You can certainly go to the article that's linked in my article, and it will prompt you to sign up for their articles. Probably more than you need, but you can just delete them. It's great stuff. So think about this. You're interviewing for a remote job and you're probably interviewing through a video cam scenario. And they get to the point where they say, so now what questions do you have for me? And instead of like panicking and not knowing what you're going to say, make sure that you consider adding some of these really good questions either at the very end, or if the conversation comes up and they say, well, how do you feel about remote work? Or this is going to be remote work. You can ask a couple of questions then and save some more for the end of the interview. But thinking about these questions and getting answers to these questions is really important to you because you don't want to assume anything, right? We know what happens when we assume. It's very dangerous to do that. So, question one, would I be working traditional office hours? If not, what are the hours? Is this team is this a fully distributed team? What percentage of the team is remote? So, distributed teams is a term that you may not have heard of before, but sometimes companies already have employees working remotely. And if they've been doing that for a while, that means they probably have better refined processes than a company that just started using remote workers and having distributed teams when COVID hit. Because those companies that just started doing this when COVID hit had to scramble to put stuff in place. They didn't really have procedures in place for working remotely. Um, so if this is a fully distributed team, what percentage of the team is remote? If you're the only one working remotely and everybody else is on site, that's a little red flag there too. It'll be much harder for you to feel like you're part of a team if everybody else is collaborating and on site there. How does the team communicate? What tools do you use to collaborate? This is a really good question because if you have not worked remotely in the past, there are some tools that you're going to need to get up to speed on, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Slack or some of the other, and there are many, many other tools that teams are using to communicate and to track progress. And so you want to get as much of a head start on some of those tools if you haven't had a chance to use them before. Slack is something, it's personalized and managed differently in every company, but the tool itself, you can do some tutorials or watch some YouTube videos on Slack on how to use Slack if you haven't used it before. Same thing with Microsoft Teams and some of the Trello is another sort of tracking tool that some companies use. So find out what those tools are. How do you typically give feedback to remote employees? That's a great question. It's always a great question to ask. How do you typically give feedback, right? But to find out how you give feedback to remote employees is really important. Is that going to mesh with your style? What type of regular social events does the team or department have? And if it's a small company, does your company offer? You want to know, what is this employer doing to invest in fostering the feeling of a community? Just having remote workers all doing their own thing and having team meetings is not enough for people who are working remotely to feel part of a team. So again, that's sort of indicative of how well the employer has embraced remote working. How has the organization overcome challenges with remote work? I would hope that any company that has been doing this just since the pandemic has made some mistakes and they've learned from it and they're not embarrassed or afraid to say this is what we've learned and this is what we've put in place. What opportunities for growth exist in this role? Especially if you're working remotely. Sometimes those career paths are a little foggy for remote workers, and it may be a different path than those employees that are in-house or not distributed. So those are the seven questions that I thought the Muse did a really good job putting together. So, your thoughts on, are these questions going to be helpful for you before your next remote job? Hey Matt, good to see ya. Hey Rhonda, oh good to see you. Dublin, Ohio, I know where that is. So those were those 7 questions that you should ask when you're interviewing for a remote job. The other article was sadly about why did you leave your last job and how to answer that question if you were fired. I just worked with a client who actually was fired, and I may not have given him the best advice, but I'm still sort of sticking with it. He was let go for um, a reason. How do I say this? He was let go for something that he did. And so it just happened that it was handled poorly by the company, and he learned a lot through that experience as well. But it's not like this was the first time he'd ever been fired from a job, so it was a shocker to him. But the recommendation that I gave him after talking with him was um, to coincide his termination with changes that had been going on in the organization because his company had just recently been bought out, and that meant a change in leadership. And so, and it was also the coronavirus. So his simple answer to why did you leave your last job was my position was eliminated. And that was it. He didn't go into any detail. He didn't explain how or why or anything that was going on. Um, and it wasn't really a lie to say his position was eliminated. It was for him. And they had not reposted the job. So it was still available, or they weren't going to backfill it. So, I, long big picture, looking back, when he got hired by the company, he then had the question, okay, how are references going to work? What am I going to say to my new employer? Because there's really more to the story that I didn't include. I'm like, well, you'll have to face that when you when you are working with that employer, if they ever raise the question about why, did you really just, was your job really eliminated, or was there something else going on? Then you'll have to address it then. And he is a very honest, trusting person, and he felt uncomfortable about that, but he did understand that if he had mentioned the fact that he was fired for cause too early in the job search interviewing process, he may have been eliminated. And so he was willing to take that risk. And I think that, while it's not really lying, I want to encourage people never to divulge too much information. It's like on a first date. If you're having a first date, divulging all of the quirks and habits that you have that may not be attractive to the person that you're meeting for the first time in this blind date. Could it hurt your chances of getting a second date? Yeah, it could. Will it come out eventually during the dating process, or in your case, the interviewing process? I'm hoping that you are given a chance to fess up, provide a little bit more detail around that before you actually get hired. But I want you to read that article on jobhunt.org written by Beth Cawley. There's some sample answers in there, and if you have been fired, what you have to realize is that people get fired all the time, and really it was an opportunity for you to learn something about yourself and about the kind of environment and people you work best with. And if you can chalk it up to that, great, right? Because nobody's perfect. We learn through trial and error, and that those are the mistakes that we've learned from. So that was a good article. It was sort of late to the game to help my client, but I did want to share my experience with a client and how that worked. Um, the next article I thought was really important because we're doing more networking today than we've done in the past. And so it's important that we have a set of questions that we can ask during informational meetings or networking meetings, whatever you want to call them, exploratory meetings. And it really depends on who you're talking to, what their role is. So Forbes Coaches Council had this collection of 14 key questions to ask during informational meetings. And again, it depends on the scenario, but there's some good general ones here. What makes you successful in this role? What are the organization's values? Um, Hold on, I'm scrolling. It's stuck. And so while I'm reading through these, do you have a question that you like asking during an informational meeting, a networking meeting to gain more insight from the person that you've been meeting with? um, Whether they work inside the company or not. And most of these are assuming that or presuming that you are meeting with somebody who works for a company that you are interested in for an informational meeting. But that doesn't always have to be the case. Sometimes the person may have a role similar to you in a different company. They're great people to meet with too. What is your commitment to employee learning? Instead of asking the question, and I hear people ask this so much, what kind of professional development is available? Th- What is your commitment to employee learning is a much broader, bigger picture because it's not all about training. There's a lot of other ways companies are supporting employee learning. What was the biggest surprise after joining the company? Or that could be, again, outside of your role, outside of the company, and it's somebody in that role. What was the biggest surprise you faced after taking this role? What makes you stay with this company? What would make someone a bad fit? What's the overall turnover rate? I don't know if most people could answer that. Um, but what you're looking for is an understanding of do people stay in this company, in this role, or do they leave? What impact can I make in this role? What does a typical week look like? What keeps you up at night? What's the biggest hire? What's the best hire you've ever made? What are your favorite industry resources? I love, love, love that question. That can be asked of anybody who's in your industry. So those are the 14 different informational meeting questions that these coaches came up with. And if you have your own, I'd love to hear what those may have been. At one point, and I think it's somewhere on my website, I have a list of networking questions that you can ask. But again, the goal is you're asking for this networking meeting. You want to make sure that you go in prepared with a list of questions. You're not going to be able to ask all 14, but because, it'll be about a 15, 20, 30-minute meeting. But you want to prioritize the questions, sort of warm up the person with an easy question. The middle of your networking meeting will be the tougher questions, and then end, the more general question would be great. Just sort of ease out of the conversation. So those are some really good ones to use. There was an article about online career fairs and how to succeed even if it's your first time, and I contributed to that. The thing about that article is that it was published years ago, just when career centers and colleges and universities were starting to experiment with online career fairs. We've now been forced into that world. Um, there are not probably as many career fairs being offered in general as there once were, but if you go to Indeed and you search for online career fairs, you may come up with a list of some of the career fairs that are being offered right now. The nice thing is that just like a regular career fair, um, there are going to be oftentimes companies that you may not have heard of before, and that gives you a chance to familiarize yourself with them before you attend the event. Um, you may run one of your favorite employers may be there, and that gives you a chance to chat with them. And literally, it's chat; it's not video. And it just gives you experience in performing in a career fair that's virtual. So if you have a chance and you are interested in doing that, that's a good, it's just another way. Sometimes companies will offer their own career fair. If they're hiring for a lot of different positions, they'll have career fairs for their own company. And I saw some of those when I was searching Indeed as well. So online career fairs, have any of you ever been to an online career fair? Has anyone ever been to an online career fair? Let me know in the chat if you have been. I have been part of one, um, and I wasn't overly impressed. It certainly doesn't exactly replicate the experience of going to an online career fair because you're chatting in the chat box with the recruiter that's there from the company, the representative. You're not speaking with them, and it, it's just harder to communicate, I found. Um, One of the things that I see time and time again as I'm looking at job descriptions and I'm reading the different articles about what the emerging or hot job skills are for the next 5 years or whatever that looks like, every single time, and this has been true for the last few years, I've seen people say, companies say, we need people with better data analysis and data skills, right? And so there is a tool out there that analyzes data called Tableau. It's one of the top tools that businesses use to sort of to compile data and make it usable. Um, it's sort of statistical and more than that. But Tableau is making available data literacy for all, a free data skills training for individuals and organizations. So this is your chance to become more fluent in data analysis and how data can be used in any organization today. And so if you don't have those skills, it's a great way to start. If you do have those skills and you want to brush up on them, be looking for Tableau's additional courses that they'll be offering for free. Here's the thing. Let's say I've got a customer service rep. I have two customer service reps that I'm looking at. One has data analysis skills, or at least can speak to it, and the other has no idea what I'm talking about. Which candidate is a better buy for the money? The one who has the data literacy, the one who can speak to data analysis and data skills. Um, we will be coming soon to a day where that is going to be required of almost every single role in the organization. And so it's going to behoove you to build those skills now rather than waiting until your next employer gives you training. Because in this kind of training, you're getting a more of an overview of how data is being used across different industries and in different scenarios. So it's going to be helpful to give you sort of that perspective. And I want you to be thinking as you're going through that training, how could I use some of this data analysis in my next role? And then you can, work on projects and be thinking about what you might want, what data you might track, that kind of thing. So it will build some more confidence in you and give you sort of a way to differentiate yourself. So that was fun. The last article I shared was from First Round, and long ago I used to come across articles from First Round, not so often. It was shared by Phyllis Muffson on Twitter. The article has to do with your well-being, and it's 6 small steps for handling the emotional ups and downs at work. This is what I know, and this is what everyone is saying, right? Job search is hard enough during a pandemic, but for all of those people that are working, still working during a pandemic, and for you when you start a new job, still in a pandemic, there are going to be emotional situations that you're going to have to deal with, either yours or the emotional issues of somebody on the team where you get mad at somebody because they didn't do their end of the work that they were supposed to complete by a certain time frame. This article, though it sounds small, is quite large. And there are all these different ideas and sort of theories on how to better manage expectations of coworkers, of subordinates, of um, people that you work with. So it's really, not only does it apply to you in job search because your emotional ups and downs are definitely going on right now. It's this roller coaster, but it also will work for you once you're in the workplace. Simple things like enjoying your family and relationships. So one of the benefits benefits of this pandemic is that we're cooped up with our partner, spouse, family more than we were before. There are fewer activities for people to run out the door and attend. So we are spending more time together. And so the article says, spending time with people we like, we love, is really one of the best things that we can do to help even out the emotional ups and downs. So there are a lot of great tips in this article, um, uh, and I hope that you take a look at it. So that that was the sum of what was in this week's Summary Sunday. Um, so I see, Craig, that you didn't go to a career fair, but you went to an online trade conference. And so, yeah, very much like the job fair, you're going to be able to network with people that were there, that were in attendance, maybe fellow job seekers or other companies. It's just, I bet you found it challenging because it is more chat texting than it is actually having conversations. So Matt, I'm reading your question now. Um, a question on asking for a meeting or informational interview. It seems like it's a little harder to ask for 20 to 30 minutes. More senior, the more senior the level of the person, a VP, market, or directors. Would you suggest making a request for as specific as possible so they feel their time is valued? Um, I, so I have heard people, you could do a 15 to 20 minute. You could ask for just 15 minutes. I just think that if you are meeting somebody for the first time, a good 5 minutes, part of that beginning conversation is really about getting to know the person that you're going to be talking to and sharing your introduction and so that's 5 minutes right there. And that's assuming you both arrive on time, right? So then that leaves you 10 minutes for the rest of the conversation if it's only 15 minutes. And so that's really just 5 minutes because the last 5 minutes you're sort of winding down and summing up your action items. So if 5 minutes is going to be enough for you to ask questions, then that will work if the person's really senior and you feel like it's going to take too much of their time and I don't think somebody's going to turn down a 20 minute or versus a 15 minute, but um, you really I don't think there are any rules on this. It really depends on you, the person, and how you're asking. And you can certainly say, I have these questions that I'd love to review with you and send them the questions in advance. That's always nice so they can either write their answers or think about their answers before they get back to you. Here's the other thing. Whatever amount of time you ask for, whether it's 15, 20, 30 minutes, your job as the person who is coordinating and asking for the meeting is to hold true to your deadline. So if you say 15 minutes, then you need to be watching the clock. And when 15 minutes arrives, you need to say, I'm conscious of the time. You told me you would give me 15 minutes. We're already at 15 minutes. So if we need to schedule another time or end the call now, I just want to be respectful of your time. So your job as the organizer of the meeting is to hold, you know, be true to the amount of time you're asking for. It is quite possible that the person will say, "Oh, I've got more time. Let's just continue on." But your job is to make sure that you're being respectful of their time. So, Matt, I hope that answered your question. I agree. The higher up you go the food chain, up the food chain you go, the higher up the corporate ladder, the more difficult it may be to ask for more time. But I think that if somebody's willing to bake time into their schedule, 15 minutes isn't that much different from 30 minutes, depending on this situation. So managing that time expectation. Oh, I'm so glad that So Craig says I actually set up a couple of meetings with people who had expertise in software I needed to know for a job I was applying for. They were really helpful. That's really smart. Good job on that, Craig. Yeah, because oftentimes we might be applying for a new job with a new set of for a company that's using different software. You may not have knowledge of that software, so you're going to want to talk to people who do use that software and find out what else it might be similar to that you have used, because that's a great selling point in an interview. While I don't have knowledge of this specific software, I've talked to a couple of people who are in similar in the same industry who use it and talk to them about my familiarity with this software, and they say it's not all that different. And I use software all the time, and learning new software has really not been a challenge for me in the past. So whatever you can do to overcome an obstacle or a potential obstacle by gaining knowledge is a great thing to do. Does anyone else have any other questions or thoughts they want to share, ask right now before we wind up? All right. Well, I want y'all to have a great Monday. Good luck with everything that you're working on. Set some goals, block some time off, and get that job search stuff done this week. And then you can reward yourself by going out and doing something fun for yourself. So have a great week, everybody. It was great seeing you. If you know people that this would benefit, you can always send them to my Facebook page. They can watch the live rerun of this, and or I post them all up on YouTube. So they're on my YouTube channel. If you missed a past episode, it's easy to find them there. Have a great week, everybody. Talk to you later.